welcome to another episode of Atomic Vinyl Reviews. My name is Jacob, and today we're going to be doing something a little bit different to what I've been doing in my videos so far. Quite different, actually. So when I was taking a look through the official art book for Godzilla King of the Monsters, I did promise in that video that when my novelization of the book arrived, if I happened to get more than a grand total of 3... you can see 1, 2, 3. 3 likes for that video, then I would do a reading of Godzilla King of the Monsters, the official novelization. And as it turns out, I got like 8 likes or something on that video, so looks like I'm doing a bloody audiobook here, guys. So I must warn you, I have really bad loud reading skills, so it's gonna be a bit of a pain. I've not read a full book since I was in either late primary school or early high school, so I don't read much. But I figured this would be a fun little attempt, and if it works out, then you guys will have a nice little easy audiobook that you can access of Godzilla King of the Monsters novelization. So yeah, let's get started. I've got my microphone set up off screen here, and hopefully, fingers crossed, this will turn out nicely. But, you know, I'm probably going to have trouble reading a lot of the character names and some of the other weird words aloud, and some basic English easy stuff will probably sound a bit crappy too. We'll see! But yeah, let's get right into it with Chapter 1 of the official novelization of Godzilla King of the Monsters, novelization by Greg Keyes, based upon the screenplay by Michael Dougherty and Zach Shields, story by Max Borenstein and Michael Dougherty and Zach Shields, based upon the characters Godzilla, King Ghidorah, Mothra, and Rodan, owned and created by Toho Co. Ltd. So yeah, that's what we're going to be looking at. Fingers crossed and wish me luck, guys. Let's get into it. Alright guys, let's get started. So, the official movie novelization, Godzilla, King of the Monsters. We're going to start with the prologue here, guys. It's called The Depths. He woke, and he prowled his territory. He was in no hurry, he wasn't hungry, only smelling, seeing, listening. The depths were not silent. The depths' sound was time, the steady, slow grind of the earth, the slipping of stone under stone. He heard this, not with his ears, but through his bones. It was loudest in the hot places where he fed and rested. But it was everywhere, the background against which all other sound existed. Sometimes it grew sharper when the earth cracked, and the heat came out, bearing sustenance. Quicker were the songs of the tides which were nowhere the same. He knew each contour of the continents by the sound of their tides, moving in and out like breath. Even in the deep ocean, no two trenches or surmounts sounded the same as the surface swelled and sank above them. Smaller and swifter still, the clicks and the low and high calls of the great swimmers, the high-pitched pipping of the smaller ones, the grunts, whistles, chirps of life. The sea was never silent, but it had been quieter before. Before strange sounds invaded the ocean, the churning and banging and screeching of unliving things that left the smell of oil behind them. The great swimmers could no longer hear each other well. Sometimes they lost their way, could not find each other. Over the ages, the sounds of the sea had changed, but never so much, never so quickly. Now there was a new song. It pulsed through the deeps, faint and unmistakable, the voice of something in his territory that should not be there. So that was the prologue, guys. Pretty creepy, but let's move on. This is Chapter 1. As usual, Emma woke before the alarm sounded. Her restless mind rarely allowed her the benefit of a full night's sleep, and today was shaping up to be an exciting one. She'd put in a long night, but it had been worth it. She stayed in bed a few more minutes, going over her plans for the day. She rose, showered, brushed her teeth, combed out her long unburned hair, dressed. She turned on the television, flipped through a few channels, but didn't hear anything she didn't already know. She paused, however, when she came to the BWN. It showed a Senate hearing. Serizawa, Graham were there, looking beleaguered. She remembered a similar inquiry 5 years ago, with her in the hot seat. She didn't envy the two scientists. Top brass at the mysterious Monarch organization will face another intense grilling as the government continues to push for extermination of the Titans, the anchor was saying. And rumors persist that Monarch may be hiding even more creatures discovered since the turning the page. Attacks of 2014, a historic tragedy that changed the world as we know it forever. The day that the world discovers monsters are real. Some people had known there were monsters in the world for many years, generations, but mostly the monsters slept or lurked in the remote corners of the planet. They kept contained by Monarch. But 5 years ago, when a monster broke free from containment in Japan and charted a path of destruction from Japan throughout Honolulu, and finally San Francisco, the fact that monsters were real became very public knowledge. The world learnt of Godzilla. Thousands died in a few days. Once great cities lay in ruins. When it was over, 2 Mutos, massive, unidentified terrestrial organisms, lay dead, killed by Godzilla, and when the fight was over, the wounded Godzilla dragged himself into the ocean and vanished. A few months later, he reappeared to fight another Muto, this time in more remote places with less damage and fewer collateral deaths. Then he once more returned to the depths. For 5 years, humanity had lived in fear of another attack. The housing market crashed as the value of waterfront properties plummeted. School children drilled to evacuate in case of a monster attack. As the monster's existence came to light, so did Monarch. Scientists from the organization were called before various government bodies and questioned at length about their intentions and methods. In the years since the attacks, intelligence agencies and investigative reporters had come to believe that Godzilla and the Mutos weren't the only monsters out there. There might be more, many more. Emma turned her gaze from the TV screen down to a hard black plastic case on the floor. It's going to work, she thought. I know it will. But if she was so sure, why was she so nervous? She turned the TV off and heard a piercing noise from the next room. Maddie, she thought. Madison pushed some of the school books on the kitchen table aside to make room for her sticker-plastered laptop, put in her earbuds, and scrolled through her emails. As the Pixies' wave of mutilation began hammering at her eardrums. As usual, more than half of the emails were from Dad. That wasn't all that surprising. She didn't have many friends, and even less family outside of Mom and Dad. Neither did Dad, at least not anymore, which probably explained why he wrote her at least once a day, and often more. Despite the fact that it had been many a long time since she'd answered him, she hadn't even opened the most recent ones. She wasn't entirely sure why. There was Mom, of course, and what she would think, and she had her own misgivings, but he was so persistent, and she did miss him a lot. She had a clear picture of him in her mind, sending the email, checking for her response, and finding nothing. The look of disappointment on his face. Mum might not understand, but Maddie was sure he was different now. Maybe not all the way back to his old self, but better, way better. She let out a breath and clicked on the most recent email. Hey Madison, it read. Haven't heard from you guys in a few months. Hope you're having fun. Here's a few pictures of the wolves I've been studying. Aren't they cute? Of course, she loved the wolves. He knew that, like everything wild and pure, they appealed to her in a way so deep and strong she couldn't explain it aloud. And the pups were really cute. But she was also a little jealous of them. Dad was always out in the wilderness and in Colorado with the wolves, and although she knew it was more complicated than that, it still left a hollow in her gut that boiled down to this: why could he be there for the wolves but not for her? But of course, when he was around, the tug of war always started again, with her as the rope. Among the pictures was one selfie. Dad had a little more grey in his brown hair than when she had last seen him. He was attempting to look silly and doing a pretty good job of it. It made her think of better times, the games they had played together. He was trying to reconnect with her, so maybe she should try too. She hit the reply and placed her finger on the keyboard, trying to think of how to start. Maybe just the basics. "Sorry I haven't written back," she began. "I miss you, but there's something I want to talk to you about." Again she paused, glancing nervously at her mother's room. How much should she tell him? Nothing if Mum had anything to say about it. Dad wasn't supposed to be involved in any of this anymore, but it was so big that what was happening was so important. He shouldn't be completely left out of the loop. "I'm getting worried about Mum," she began. And then the smoke detector started its shrilling beeping. "Oh, shit, shit, shit," she yelped. Bolting up, she had forgotten. Why hadn't she smelt it? But she did now, as the smoke boiled up from the pan of burning bacon, filling the tiny kitchen with a grey haze, and the smell of ruined porky goodness. She yanked it off the stove, but it was way too late. The rashes were now just strips of charcoal. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Mum enter the kitchen. Of course. Shit again, she thought. This place is way too small to get away with anything. "Maddie," Mum said, and her mother, Dr. Emma Russell, with a paleobiologist, was a paleobiologist these days. That was one of the coolest jobs around, but paleobiology was a lot like detective work. For forensics, detecting the big picture from the little things, which means it was hard to pull off anything over her. "Good morning," she blurted as she scrambled to turn off the smoke alarm. "Mom, hi, I made breakfast." "Oh God," Mom said, and hurried to help her with the mess. "It's eggs, toast, and what was once bacon." Her mom smiled. "And which do you recommend?" "The toast and eggs," she said with a chuckle. "Thank you," Mom said, turning to the counter and sitting down. She glanced at the open laptop. Maddie reached over and pushed it close, trying to look casual. "Okay," she thought, "that didn't look suspicious at all." "Coffee?" she asked, pouring a cup. "What were you working on?" her mum asked. "Nothing," Madison lied, putting the plates on the table. "Just looking up recipes." Before she even finished the sentence, she saw how her mother didn't buy it. Of course she didn't. She sat and poked at her eggs, trying to find the right spin on it. "Dad's been emailing me," she admitted finally. Alarm and concentration flittered across her mother's face, quickly replaced by a carefully neutral expression. She was trying not to freak out, and as usual doing a pretty good job, at least on the outside, and she was still listening, which was good. "He looks good," Maddie said. "Healthy." "Have you responded?" Mum asked. "Not yet." She took a bite of her eggs. Now, Mum was trying to find a tactful response. It was strange. They were so tight on most things, they didn't argue a lot, and it was very seldom things got awkward between them. But the subject of Dad never failed to make them both uncomfortable. "Honey," her mother began, "I just don't want to see you get hurt. I know, especially with everything that's going on right now." But that was just the thing. A lot was going on, and maybe Dad should know. He deserved to know. But she knew she couldn't say that to Mum. "Mom, I know," she said instead. "Really?" For a moment her mother was silent.
Listen, she said finally in a softer voice. I know things haven't been easy for you, but we're gonna get through this together. She thought of Dad in Colorado with the wolves, and years ago, when everything had seemed fine, and it wasn't. It was hard to trust that kind of promise. No one knew for sure what was going to happen even in the next few minutes, much less a year from now or more. Not even her mother. You're sure he's gonna be okay? She pressed. He's in the safest place he can be right now. Her mother assured her. Then she perked up a little. Hey, you want to hear some good news? I finished it. For a split second, Madison didn't know what she meant. But then she saw the metal case, the orca. Really? Her mother nodded, unable to suppress a beam of pride, and why shouldn't she be proud? She has been working her ass off on it for years. She even remembered her and her dad tinkering with it a little, way back when. But these past few months, the orca had seen more of Mum than she had. But that was okay. This was exciting. This was everything, really. It was going to change the world. You think it's going to work? She asked. Mum stood up and lifted the case. It's gonna work, she said. A low, grating rumble shriveled through the room. The lights went out and flickered back on, dimmed and came back up again. A high-pitched shriek cut through the nearby subsonic growl. It sounded like nothing Maddie had ever heard before. And living with Mum, she had heard some awfully weird things. Mum went to the window, frowning, eyes wide and lips pulled tight. Maddie joined her. It's going to be okay, Maddie said. Mum put her arm around her. Her two-way radio cranked on. Dr. Russell, a man's voice said, we need you in containment. Her mother seemed a little disorientated. But then she looked at Madison and her composure returned. On my way, she said. She put on her jacket and picked up her boots. Maddie grabbed her own muddy boots. She already had her hoodie on, good to go. Mum shot her a questioning glance. You're kidding, Maddie said. Of course I'm going. Mum's only answer was a proud smile. Then she picked up the orca and they went outside. Inside their quarters could have been anywhere. Her mum had tried to make them as normal as possible, but once you went outside or even looked out a window, the illusion was broken. Their apartment was a temporary barracks, a neat little prefab house, L-shaped with solar panels on the roof. It sat on a forest hill looking down a compound of similar structures, a sort of fancy trailer court surrounded by a chain link fence. A couple of watchtowers kept vigil over the compound, and satellite dishes maintained their connection with the rest of the world, at least as much contact as Monarch protocols allowed. Outside, the cool, damp air smelled of decay, freshly turned earth, tropical flowers, bruised leaves, and something faintly metallic. Council trees with thickly buttressed trunks rose up through a lower canopy of tropical evergreens and climbing vines, the little piece of highland rainforest that filled the valley and spread into the surrounding mountains. Monkeys, gibbons, more birds than she could identify even with the help of the internet, variously flew, climbed, or swung through the dense branches, and insects, so many strange, fascinating species. Once she had seen a walking stick half a foot long. She thought that was impressive at the time. But as amazing as all of that was, the sight was much cooler. Surrounded by lush green mountains from the camp, it looked something like a mountain itself. Although on a second look, it was too regular. Beneath an incrustation of climbing vines, lianas, ferns, and creepers, a gigantic four-sided pyramid rose in steps, 8 in all. It resembled the Great Pyramid of Kuola in Mexico and the ziggurats of ancient Mesopotamia, but it also shared some features with the hundreds of ancient temples scattered around China and Southwest Asia. But the archaeologists said that this was different. From what they had said, it was far older than any of the better-known ruins. Dr. Lilly, one of the epigraphers on the team, once told Maddie the glyphs on it carved surfaces no more resembled ancient Chinese than they did Malayan hieroglyphs, yet they reminded her of both, and also of the Indus Valley script and undercleaved glyphs of Easter Island. Sorry about those pronunciations, guys. I'm trying. Anyway, back to it. Perhaps a prototype of all of them, Lily had said in her musical French accent, "When I have deciphered them, perhaps we shall see." There had once been more to this site. The rainforest around the pyramid concealed the ruins of an impressive city before whatever catastrophe befell it thousands of years ago. Now little remained of the other structures. Mounds of stone blocks, strange faces of broken statues peering from the underbrush with empty eyes, the occasional low wall that still sketched the foundations of once imposing buildings. The world at large had forgotten the place. The locals knew about it, of course, but they rarely admitted it. Now, because it was not because it was a taboo or that they were afraid of it, but because they were protective of it and suspicious of the intentions of the outsiders. Monarch had discovered it, though. Sophisticated satellite imagery rather than through word of mouth, but the site was more than an archaeological dig. What mattered most was deep within the pyramid, which was where they were headed, and where the weird sounds were coming from. She and Mum climbed into a jeep as the guards opened the gate. A woman, Renata, one of the watchtowers, waved at her. And she waved back. She had a daughter about her age back home. They drove through the gate, down the bumpy packed dirt trail to the temple. Up close, you could see the unique features of the pyramid. Comparable structures around the world were usually filled in bases of temple structures on the top. Some might contain relatively small burials or treasure chambers. The temple of the Moth was different. It was largely hollow, supported by stone columns. It had multiple interior levels and entrances. Like their living compound, it was surrounded by a fence and watchtowers. They left the jeep outside of the fence and went on foot. Another set of guards led them through, then closed the gate behind them. They climbed the broad central stair through the central doorway. And that is the end of Chapter 1. I think I'm going to do this series chapter by chapter, just because reading aloud is beginning to start to hurt my voice a little bit. But hopefully I'll get a little better as we go through the book. Thank you again for bearing with my horrible pronunciation of some things, my awkward pauses, my loud breathing, and all that annoying stuff. I hope you are enjoying the series, and we'll stay tuned for Chapter 2, which I'll have up shortly, maybe in a week or something. But yeah, thanks guys for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, all that jazz, and as always, may all your vinyl be a radiated vinyl. Over and out!